In the spring of 1952, the Italian government did something no modern European state had ever done before. It signed a law ordering the evacuation of an entire city, not because of war, not because of an earthquake or a flood or a plague. The city was condemned for a different reason entirely, because the way its people lived was considered an embarrassment to the nation. 17,000 men, women, and children were ordered out of homes their families had occupied for generations. Homes that were not built, but carved, hollowed by hand into the soft rock of a ravine in southern Italy. The Prime Minister himself came to see them and left visibly shaken. The country's most powerful politician stood in front of those caves and gave them a name that would stick for half a century: La Vergogna Nazionale, the shame of Italy. Here is what nobody in 1952 could have predicted. Today, those exact same caves are some of the most sought-after hotel rooms in Europe. People now pay 500, 800, sometimes over €1,000 a night to sleep in the very rooms the Italian state once declared unfit for human beings. James Bond raced through these alleys. Hollywood crucified Christ here twice. And in 2019, the city that Italy tried to erase was crowned the European capital of culture. How does a place fall that far and then rise that high within a single human lifetime? There are people alive today who were carried out of these caves as children and who have lived long enough to watch tourists queue up to get in. The answer to how that happened is hidden in three things: a book written by a painter in exile, a secret buried beneath the city's main square that no one rediscovered until 1991, and a misunderstanding so profound that it took the world 40 years to realize the shame of Italy was actually one of the most ingenious cities ever carved by human hands. This is the story of the Sassi di Matera, and almost nothing about it is what it first appears to be. Your first sight of Matera is disorienting in a way photographs never quite capture. Because you don't look up at this city, you look down into it. You arrive on a flat, sun-bleached plateau in Basilicata, the arch of the Italian boot, one of the emptiest and least visited regions in the country. And the land simply opens beneath your feet. A canyon, the Gravina, splits the earth like a wound, and spilling down one side of it, layer upon layer upon layer, is a city the color of bone. At first, your eyes refuse to organize what they're seeing. Thousands of doorways, arches, staircases, and chimneys tumble over each other down the slope, all cut from the same pale limestone, so that it is impossible to tell where the mountain ends and the architecture begins. Then you notice something stranger. The streets are not beside the houses, they are on top of them. The roof of one family's home is the road in front of another's front door. A staircase climbs over somebody's bedroom ceiling. The whole city is stacked vertically, dwelling upon dwelling like a honeycomb cut in half. In the early morning, the only sounds are church bells echoing off the canyon walls and the screaming of swifts, hundreds of them, wheeling through air that smells of dust and wild thyme. Across the ravine, on the far cliff face, you can make out black openings in the rock, older caves, prehistoric ones, watching the city like empty eyes. At dusk, when the limestone turns the color of honey and the lights come on in the cave mouths, Matera looks less like a town in modern Italy and more like a vision of Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. Film directors noticed exactly the same thing. But we'll come to that. To understand why anyone would carve a city into a cliff in the first place, you have to go back further than almost any other inhabited place in Europe lets you go. People were living in the caves of this ravine in the Paleolithic era. Archaeologists have traced continuous human settlement here across roughly 9,000 years, through Greeks, Romans, Byzantines, Normans, and everyone since. Matera is routinely ranked among the oldest continuously inhabited settlements on Earth, in the company of places like Jericho and Aleppo. When the pyramids were being raised in Egypt, there were already families cooking dinner in these caves. The reason is the rock itself. The ravine is cut through calcarenite, a soft, porous limestone the locals simply call tufo. It is gentle enough to carve with hand tools, yet it hardens on contact with air. For a poor community, that changes everything. You don't need timber you don't have, or money you don't have to build a home. You need a pick, time, and patience. When your family grows, you don't buy land, you dig another room deeper into the hill. The city literally grew inward, generation by generation, like rings in a tree, except the rings run backwards into darkness. Step into an old Sassi dwelling today, and you walk a timeline, a front room built in the 1700s, behind it a chamber cut in the Middle Ages, and behind that, a cave wall first blackened by fire, before anyone wrote anything down. But there was one enormous problem with this location, and it should have made the city impossible. There is almost no water. The stream at the bottom of the canyon is too far below for daily use, and rain here is scarce and violent, long droughts broken by sudden storms that vanish into the porous stone. By every rule of geography, a city of thousands should never have survived on this dry slope for 90 centuries. It survived because of what the people of Matera did with that soft rock. And this is the first thing about the Sassi that almost everyone misses. The entire city is a machine. Every roof, every street, every sloping surface was angled to catch rain and guide it, drop by drop, through a network of carved channels into thousands of bell-shaped cisterns, hollowed beneath the houses. Porous stone filtered the water as it seeped downward. Overflow from one family's cistern spilled into a channel that fed their neighbors below. Caves dug into north-facing rock stayed cool enough to store snow in winter and keep food from spoiling in the savage southern summer. Hanging gardens grew on the rooftops of other people's homes. The Sassi were not a slum that happened to be in a cliff. They were a vast communal water-harvesting organism refined over thousands of years. Sustainable architecture before anyone had invented the term. Hold on to that thought because it is the key to this entire story. And it is hiding something underneath the main square that will take us until 1991 to find. For centuries, the system worked. And then, in the Middle Ages, the ravine filled with something unexpected. Monks, hermits, and Byzantine monastic communities fleeing turmoil in the East arrived in this strange stone landscape and recognized it instantly. It looked like the deserts of Cappadocia and the Holy Land they had left behind. They began carving too. Not homes this time, but churches. Today, more than 150 Rupestrian churches are cut into the rock in and around Matera. Entire chapels with columns, domes, and altars, all sculpted in negative space. Hollowed rather than built, their walls still carry Byzantine frescoes, wide-eyed saints and Madonnas painted 1,000 years ago, glowing in the dark like embers. One of them, hidden in a cave outside the city, holds paintings so old and so important that scholars now call it the Sistine Chapel of Cave Art. For centuries, almost no one knew it existed. Shepherds sheltered their flocks inside it, lighting fires under 9th-century masterpieces without ever knowing what was above their heads. So how does a 9,000-year-old marvel of survival become a national disgrace? The fall of the Sassi is a story about what happens when an old system is pushed past its breaking point. And it happened with brutal speed. Through the 18th and 19th centuries, Matera's population exploded, but its geography could not. The wealthy abandoned the ravine for the new town being built on the flat plateau above, along what is called the Piano. The poor were left below, and they kept coming, landless peasants who walked miles each dawn to work fields they would never own, returning each night to the only housing they could afford. Deeper, darker, older caves, never meant to hold families at all. The elegant logic of the ancient city collapsed under the weight. Cisterns that had supplied water for millennia were emptied, dried out, and converted into bedrooms because there was nowhere else to put the children. The machine that had kept Matera alive was being dismantled, room by room, by sheer desperation. A city designed over 90 centuries to manage water now had none, and no sewage system either. By the 1930s, conditions inside the Sassi had become almost medieval. Families of 10 or 12 lived in single windowless caves, sharing their one room with the animals their survival depended on. A mule beside the bed, chickens under it, a pig by the door. The animals were not a quirk. Their body heat warmed the cave in winter. Light entered only through the doorway. Water came from whatever could be hauled or caught. Malaria swept through the ravine. So did trachoma, an eye infection that blinded children, and the statistic that still stops historians cold. In parts of the Sassi, roughly half of all children died before reaching adulthood. mothers had a custom of keeping their infants in hanging cradles, suspended from the cave ceiling, partly tradition, partly to keep them away from the animals and whatever moved across the floor at night. And yet, and this is what outsiders never understood, the Sassi were not a place of social collapse. Around shared courtyards called vicinati, an entire civilization of mutual survival had evolved. Neighbors shared ovens, water, childcare, and grief. Bread was baked communally, each family pressing a wooden stamp with its initials into the dough. When one family had nothing, the vicinato fed them. Anthropologists who studied Matera later concluded that this web of cooperation was among the most sophisticated neighborhood systems ever documented in Europe. The people had nothing, and they had each other, and those two facts were inseparable. The outside world knew none of this. The Sassi were invisible, too remote, too poor, too southern to matter. What changed everything was not a politician or a journalist, but a punishment. In 1935, the fascist regime arrested a young painter, doctor, and writer from Turin, named Carlo Levi for anti-fascist activity, and exiled him to the remote villages of Basilicata. What Levi witnessed there became a book, published in 1945. Christ Stopped at Eboli, the title taken from a local saying meaning that Christianity, morality, history itself, had halted further north and never reached this forgotten land. In its most famous passage, Levi's sister describes passing through Matera and seeing children in the cave city with the faces of the elderly, skeletal with hunger, their eyes half closed by trachoma, begging passers-by not for coins but for quinine. She compared the Sassi to Dante's Inferno, a vision of hell, except hell was real and had an address in Italy. The book detonated. Post-war Italy, desperate to present itself as a reborn modern democracy, suddenly found the world's eyes on a cave city where children were dying of medieval diseases. The leader of the Italian Communist Party visited in 1948 and branded the Sassi a national shame. Prime Minister Alcide de Gasperi came in 1950 and was reportedly stunned by what he saw. In 1952, the state passed a special law, and the unprecedented began: the complete, compulsory evacuation of Old Matera. The government built new neighborhoods on the plateau, and over the following years, around 15,000 to 17,000 people were moved out of the ravine their ancestors had inhabited since prehistory. The new homes had what the caves never did: running water, electricity, toilets, sunlight. Some of the new districts were even designed by Italy's most brilliant minds. The model village of La Martea involved the visionary industrialist Adriano Olivetti and teams of sociologists who tried, sincerely, to rebuild the vicinato in modern form, clustering houses around shared spaces. It was one of the first times the government used anthropologists to design public housing, and it still failed at what mattered most. You can pour concrete in the shape of a courtyard, but you cannot pour the trust of 40 generations into it. Scattered across separate new districts, the vicinati dissolved. Elderly residents, given bright modern kitchens, were found weeping for caves with no windows. Some families quietly kept their old cave as a stable, slipping back down into the forbidden city each day to tend a mule. Or, when no one was watching, simply to sit in the dark of home. Then came the strangest chapter of all. For nearly 30 years, one of the oldest continuously inhabited places on the planet stood empty. 9,000 years of habitation, interrupted by decree. Doors were bricked up. Staircases crumbled. Wild fig trees split the facades of churches. The abandoned Sassi became the haunt of squatters and smugglers, a place parents warned children away from, and the city above debated seriously whether to seal it off forever, to wall up the shame and let it die. Matera became, in effect, two cities, a living one on the plateau, and beneath it, pressed against its edge like a shadow, the largest ghost town in Europe. The rescue began not with the state, but with the stubborn. In the 1960s and 70s, a small circle of young Materans, artists, students, members of a local cultural circle, began breaking into their own heritage, clearing rubble from the cave churches, documenting frescoes, and arguing to anyone who would listen that the Sassi were not an embarrassment but a treasure. For years they were dismissed as romantics. Why would anyone defend the slum that had nearly killed their grandparents? But slowly, The argument took hold, and in 1986 came the reversal almost no one saw coming. A new national law that, instead of condemning the Sassi, funded their restoration and invited people to live in them again. The state offered long leases on cave homes for a symbolic rent, on one condition: restore them properly. The pioneers who moved back in were considered eccentric, even mad. They had no idea they were sitting on the next chapter of one of the great real estate reversals in history. In 1993, UNESCO declared the Sassi di Matera a World Heritage Site, the first in all of southern Italy. And read the citation closely, because it contains the twist at the heart of this whole story. UNESCO did not honor Matera in spite of how its people had lived. It honored Matera because of it, for being an outstanding example of a settlement perfectly adapted to its terrain and ecosystem, a masterpiece of living in equilibrium with a harsh environment for thousands of years. The cisterns, the shared water, the cave climate, the recycled stone, the vertical city where one roof was another street, everything the 1950s had read as backwardness, the 1990s recognized as genius. The shame of Italy had been all along a 9,000-year lesson in sustainability. The world simply hadn't been ready to understand it. Then the cameras arrived, and they came for a reason no set designer could manufacture. Because the Sassi froze in 1952, they contained no asphalt, no signage, no visible modernity, a biblical city preserved in amber. Pier Paolo Pasolini filmed his gospel here in 1964. Mel Gibson shot The Passion of the Christ in these alleys in 2003. And locals still talk about turning a corner to find Roman soldiers smoking cigarettes. And in 2021, the opening of the Bond film No Time to Die sent an Aston Martin spinning through Matera's lanes in front of 500 million viewers. The trickle of visitors became a flood, capped by 2019, when Matera reigned as European capital of culture. And here the story turns again, because the caves found one final, improbable identity: luxury. Entrepreneurs began transforming abandoned cave dwellings into hotels, unlike anything else on Earth. Rooms where the bed sits in a hand-carved grotto, candlelight moves across stone scalloped by picks centuries ago, and a freestanding bathtub steams inside what was once a cistern. The most famous of them deliberately kept the caves raw. No televisions, no minibars, no plaster hiding the rock. The philosophy being that the poverty and endurance written into these walls deserved reverence, not decoration. Rooms that the Italian state once emptied at gunpoint of law now host honeymooners at 4 figures a night. Several of the people serving breakfast in those hotels are the grandchildren of families evacuated from the very same caves. It is a miracle, and it is complicated. And the people of Matera will tell you both things in the same breath. Of the thousands of cave dwellings, only a fraction are homes again. Many are hotels, B&Bs, restaurants, and shops. Rents have climbed beyond what many locals can pay. Some residents whisper that the Sassi risk becoming a beautiful film set, saved from death by tourism, and now in danger of being hollowed out by it. A city that survived 9,000 years of everything except success. In a small cave museum, furnished exactly as a family home looked on the day of the evacuation, elderly Materans sometimes stop in the doorway and grow quiet. They are not looking at an exhibit. They are looking at their childhood, the hanging cradle, the mule stall beside the bed, displayed for strangers, and they will tell you they feel pride and grief at once, and that the two cannot be separated. But the Sassi had kept one last secret, and it surfaced only in 1991. Workers renovating Piazza Vittorio Veneto, the busy main square of the upper town, where Materans had taken their evening stroll for generations, broke through the pavement and found a void beneath their feet. Not a cellar, a chasm. When speleologists descended with lamps, the beams could not reach the walls. Beneath the city's living room lay a man-made cavern more than 15 meters deep, the height of a 5-story building, its vaulted chambers carved and waterproofed by hand. The Palombaro Lungo, a colossal cistern capable of holding around 5 million liters of water. The grand culmination of Matera's ancient hydraulic system, where the harvested rain of the whole city once gathered in the dark. It was still partly full. Divers swam through it like a flooded cathedral. their light sweeping across pick marks left by anonymous carvers. For decades, an entire population had despised the Sassi as primitive while walking, every single evening, over one of the most extraordinary feats of water engineering in the ancient world. The proof of Matera's genius had been underfoot the entire time. Today you can descend into it on a walkway just above the black water, and the silence down there is total. The silence of a verdict 9,000 years in the writing, finally overturned. Stand at the edge of the ravine at nightfall, when the swifts have gone quiet, and the caves begin to glow one by one. And Matera asks you a question that has nothing to do with Italy. Every age is certain it knows what progress looks like. In 1952, progress meant emptying these caves. In 1993, it meant protecting them. Today, it means booking them 8 months in advance. The stones never changed, only our eyes did. The people of the Sassi were called backward for living the way humanity may yet need to learn to live again. Using little, wasting nothing, catching every drop, and surviving not as individuals, but as a vicinato, a neighborhood that refused to let anyone fall alone. Perhaps that is why this place gets under the skin of everyone who visits. It is not a window into the past at all. Carved into the oldest city in Europe, there may be a blueprint for the future, and we very nearly bricked it up. So here is the question I keep turning over, and I'd love to know your answer in the comments. If your family had been forced out of the Sassi in 1952, would you have gone back? If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves discovering extraordinary places. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next adventure.